everyone, and welcome to Emotional Grit, the podcast where you can learn about the power of perspective and the science that fuels us. Today's guest is Fire Captain Justin Reid. In addition to his heroic efforts on behalf of the Minneapolis Fire Department, he also helped save his best friend when they were hiking out west from two bears that had savagely attacked him. So, Justin, without further ado, thank you so much for being here today. And to those of you who are listening, please feel free to like and subscribe on this YouTube channel. So Justin, please feel free to take us back to the Beartooth Mountains of Wyoming back in 2018 when you thought you were just going on this camping trip that would be normal and just what ensued.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me. Good to see you, Jennifer.
You too, thanks.
Yeah, so it's one of those deals where we have a group of friends that are very adventurous, and we've done boundary waters, we've done trips out west, and this particular trip out to the Beartooth Mountains, which is on the Montana-Wyoming border, is something we've done before. And there was a group that had gone in 2015 and had spotted a grizzly, but there was no problems. The grizzly ran away, so we weren't overly concerned. We knew that they were out there, which is why we carried bear spray. And then trips previous, we did have firearms. This particular trip in 2018, we did not, which honestly, in hindsight, and we've talked about it, I don't think it would have mattered given the circumstances. But regardless, the trip started as, I work as a fire captain, so I work 24-hour shifts, which prompted us to leave at 7 p.m. So we drove through the night and ended up in Montana at about 7, 8 a.m. and had some breakfast. And then we started hiking around 9 a.m. And we planned on a 4.5 to 5 hour hike, about 8 miles. And we had, there was 4 of us, my friend Brad, Tom, Todd, and myself. And we were about 4 hours into the hike when, we have a friend, Todd, who we asked to bring a tarp, and he brought this god awful white tarp, which doesn't blend in with the wilderness. So we gave him a hard time about that.
I was going to say the tarp was supposed to actually just blend in, right? But instead it was just a bright white color.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And then he works for an IT company, and he brought this huge camera case that he had never been on this trip before. So we kind of warned him, like, you really don't want to carry that. This is grueling. And he insisted. So long story short, again, we were about 4 hours into this hike, and Brad, who is the one that got attacked, told Todd, who had the camera case, it actually didn't give him an option. He just grabbed the camera case because Todd wouldn't let Brad carry it, and he strapped it on himself. So he had the camera case hanging in the front of him, and he had his big backpack, which was overpacked above his head, and he just took off. And he said, let's go. We were about we approximated a half to 1 mile away from the campsite. So he took off, and, it took us about 10, 15 minutes to kind of get our packs on and start hiking. And as we started to hike, we got about 5 minutes down the path, and Tom was in the lead, and he said, hey, did you guys hear that? And I was in the rear. I didn't hear it. And I said, no, I didn't hear what you're talking about. He's like, gosh, that was really weird. So we kept hiking, and then I did hear it, and it was just this really high-pitched sound that was not normal at all. Something was really weird, but it sounded animalistic. And so I said, yeah, that's really weird. I wonder if Brad, spooked an animal of some sort, or a bird, who knows? And so we just kept going. And then I heard it a third time, and that's when I heard kind of a voice go along with it. And there was something that's just, those spider senses went off, that something's not right. And so I took off running, and almost passed Brad because the bears had thrown him behind a log, and actually the blood caught my eye. He had a blue shirt on, and then just bright red blood everywhere. Caught my eye to my right, and it was one of those surreal moments. I think we've all had those moments that just don't make sense in your daily life. And I remember just feeling almost in shock. And I actually asked Brad, I said, hey, what, did you just get attacked by a bear? And he was obviously in shock. His color was horrible. He was, gray yellow in color, covered in blood. And he was he thought he was going to die. So, and he's a doctor. He's a ear, nose, and throat surgeon. So he kept telling me, they got an artery, it's over, save yourselves, get out of here. And that was just as Tom and Todd were approaching as well.
Well, if I the two bears were actually feeding on something. What was it, berries or something, before he came upon them, and then they charged at him when he got there?
Correct. They were pine nuts. So the game
Okay.
wardens the next day determined that was the time of year, it was September, so they were starting to prep for hibernation. And the squirrels in that area will gather all these pine nuts and make these pine nut caches. So they'll dig these holes and then bury pine nuts, and the bears come along and sniff them out, and they dig them up and eat them.
Okay.
And so that's what was happening when Brad was walking by, and Brad was on this, at that particular point in the trail. It was a really tight trail, heavily wooded. So Brad, and it was uphill. So Brad had his head down and he was just kind of trucking, and heard a little rustle to his right. And he looked over and he said it was two full-size grizzlies at a full charge 30 yards away, which he had zero reaction time. And before
Absolutely.
he down,
Well,
and they had.
And just for context, as far as what happened and what with the actual bears, I brought a copy of my book for the podcast so I could read an excerpt from it, because I did speak with Brad as well when I wrote the book. So it reads in part: "The pain was excruciating as one of them bit through the muscle of his right shoulder. Brad then released a high-pitched scream as the bear's teeth crunched through his shoulder blade and broke it. At that time, the bears repositioned themselves. He initially thought they were sitting on top of him, but they were probably standing on him with their front legs moving around as they continued to paw at his backpack. It was then that he could feel the teeth sinking into his left shoulder, so he let out another high-pitched scream as he felt muscles being torn from his shoulder and teeth sliding down his left arm as they tipped or ripped off the majority of his tricep and made their way into the bone. The bears also broke his elbow and left a large hole in the back of his arm that exposed bone." So for you to come across that, and of course Tom and Todd as well, I would imagine initially it was probably this surreal thing, like, is this really happening, or what just happened here? So what did you actually realize the enormity of it?
Yeah, immediately when I saw him, because again, and fortunately, it's funny because we're all men of faith, which is a beautiful thing, and I truly believe that I was there for a purpose, because I see it. I've seen trauma, for the last 24 years. So it was, yes, this is my friend, this is shocking, but fortunately my brain was it automatically switched into work mode to where, okay, we have a problem, let's figure out what we need and what we need to fix it. So I think I went into that mode where it was a second of, all right, this is shocking, this is not normal. And then I do have to say it was remarkable. And we've talked to a lot of church groups and youth groups over the past 5 years about this incident. And I really am proud of the fact of the way that us four men live our lives, that the first thing literally that we did was pray out loud. And there is a video. We have a video that, Brad asked for Tom to pull out his phone and so he could say goodbye to his family because he was certain he was going to die. So we have video of that, and you can hear us praying in that video. And I truly believe that God was present. And there are so many, I think we counted 14 kind of blessings or miracles that are pretty far-fetched that had to happen in order for him to survive, and they all happened. But regardless, to answer your question, there was, I would say, both Tom and Todd were definitely in a shock type state. I just started working immediately and asked them to make some stretcher of some sort, because in my mind, we're 4 hours into the wilderness with no cell phone signal. We did not have a satellite phone or what they call a spot, which is now we carry it every time we go, but it's an emergency device that's linked to a satellite that sends emergency responders immediately if you hit the magic red button. So
cool.
Since we did not have that, I asked Tom and Todd to initially just make something that we can try to carry him out, and they were remarkable. It was really remarkable. Todd's the one that actually went into the woods and started to cut trees down And in the middle of it, he told us to all stop because he had heard some rustling around, and come to find out from the game wardens the next day, they're like, yeah, the bears wouldn't have left if they knew they had a food source. They would have staged. So I'm sure that
Wow.
area when this was all going down. But regardless, Tom and Todd put together this phenomenal gurney and brought it over, and we tried to lay Brad on it, not once but twice, and it was extremely painful because the poles were right where he was all broken up. So that did not work. So once that failed, we kind of came to a conclusion that Tom and Todd were going to work their way out to try to get help, and I would stay with Brad.
So as far as what you were mentioning earlier in terms of little things happening that with the gift of hindsight, you think, you know what, there were some hidden blessings here. I'm thinking that one of them would be the heavy, bulky camera that Todd wanted to bring, because then Brad had it on him.
Absolutely. Yeah. His camera case saved severe abdominal injuries because that camera case, which was covering his abdomen, was completely destroyed. It had claw marks all through it. Todd's phone was in there and still has a camera or a claw mark on it. So he would have been torn up, and thankful that he wasn't. He had enough injuries as it was. So
Wow.
fortunately, when I cut his shirt off and found he had a lot of puncture wounds on his shoulders here that I was able to pack. And it's really interesting. Literally a week before this incident, we had a training at work talking about wound packing, and mainly with mass shootings that are prevalent right now. And a lot of people are dying from internal bleeding because they have a wound, but it's not necessarily bleeding externally, but it's bleeding internally, and the important packing wounds. So it was actually very important. And I had what they call Curlex, which is essentially gauze in a roll. And I just unrolled it and jammed it in each puncture wound as deep as I could go. And then fortunately, as far as I could tell, he did not have an arterial bleed, which was a blessing because he would have bled out. And he had some massive, like you mentioned, he had bones hanging out. He had his tricep was gone. We never found it. So we don't know where the tricep ate it, bear or bears, regardless. But
Wow.
And once Tom and Todd took off, I didn't like where we were. It was a really wooded area. I felt like the odds of the bears coming back were pretty strong. So, and I know Brad, he is literally the strongest emotionally, physically person that I've ever met. And so I told him, I'm like, hey, I know you're not going to like this, but I need you to walk for me. We don't have an option, and I'm not carrying you. So let's go. And no shirt. He's just got shorts on. I lifted him up, and he just started to walk for me. And we made it about a quarter mile down the mountain before he literally collapsed. But it ended up being a perfect spot for us because I could see 180 degrees in front of me, and I had a huge granite outcropping behind me that overlooked the lake that I could signal from.
Well, and it's interesting how people, of course, with any kind of a mauling like this, would think about the physicality of the injuries, but you also address the mental aspect of it. It's kind of like, stay with me. And if I remember correctly, didn't you say things like, hey, let's plan for our next trip to the cabin. Hey, let's go. Like you wanted him to be forward thinking and try to keep and stay conscious. So to address the mental aspects, I'm curious to hear about that too.
Yeah. So once we found that new spot, got him laid down in kind of what they call a shock position. So his head was kind of down, his legs were up, and he was again exposed. And we're talking a 60-degree day, blue sky. So, but it was chilly, and he'd lost a lot of fluid, so he was really, really, really cold. So, had to make 4 or 5 trips back to the attack site to get enough supplies to cover him up, keep him warm, and then all the medical supplies we had.
So as a testament to you, not only as a best friend, but also as a trained first responder, when you mentioned, oh yeah, I made multiple trips back to the site to get stuff. Okay, that food source was still there for the bears. So every time you went back there to get more supplies to help Brad, you risked your own life by doing that. So I just think that that's amazing that you did that. Very admirable.
Yeah, I think when I think back, it was probably a week or two after that incident where I recounted the fear that I actually did feel. I think when you're in it, the adrenaline is rushing. There's a lot going on, and you're just kind of getting the task done. But thinking back, I can remember that feeling like, this must be what war feels like, where you don't know where your enemy is. And I don't have a gun. I have two bear sprays that might buy me a little time, but just fortunately it worked out, and I was able to get him covered up. And you're right, I did lay by him, and it was funny, I'd put my hand on his head, and he got no, his arms didn't work, obviously, and the first time I did, he's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Like I'm like, "Take it down a notch, man. I'm just praying for you." So I would pray for him, and then we would. You're right. I would talk about, "Hey, you're not going," because he really was defeated. He was at that point where the pain was at a level that was exceeding anything he'd ever felt before. And his breathing, he could not control his breathing, very rapid, shallow breaths, which is not a good sign. So he was done. In his mind, he's like, it's over. He asked me, please do not perform CPR on me. He asked me to get my phone out and take down all his life insurance information and where all his money was, so that I could inform his wife of those things. And so when he was going, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Again, what a true testament to his character, because I think back to after he was initially attacked and the three of you came to save him, he kept saying, save yourselves, don't help me, save yourselves. So a very selfless mindset. And then now here he is with packed wounds and just, not in a good place breathing wise and pain wise, but to also have that mindset for others where he's thinking about his family and, what's best for them. I mean, again, the character just speaks volumes of how he handled things.
Very much so. Yeah. So I would try to distract him and say, hey, you're not going anywhere. All I need you to do is breathe. That's your only job right now, is just breathe. And we have a lot of things to do. He lives on a lake, and we've been trying to catch a muskie for years. I said, we still have to catch that muskie. He has three children, 2 daughters. I said, we have weddings to go to. We have graduations to go to. You're not going anywhere. We got stuff to do. And so that went on. I'd say it was about an hour and a half, 2 hour mark where something miraculous. I don't know what happened, but his breathing regulated. Like he all of a sudden the calm came over both of us. And I remember telling him, I'm like, Brad, I don't know why you just got attacked by this. Makes no sense. You can't make sense out of it. Which he says when we speak, he's like, yeah, I got attacked by two grizzly bears, but you know what? I think all of us individually throughout our lifetime at some point are, going to get attacked by grizzly bears.
Metaphorically attacked by grizzly bears? Yeah.
He's my time. And so, yeah, I said, I don't know why, but I know that God is good. He's going to use this for good. He tells us that. And sure enough, we're 5 years past this thing, and the number of people that this story has touched is remarkable. And it's just,
it's made national news.
Yeah, it did. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Well, and as all this is happening between the two of you, as far as you laying by him and trying to keep him conscious and what have you, Tom and Todd have run to get help. And if I remember correctly, was it Tom who blew the whistle, or was it Todd? One of them blew a whistle as they were running.
It was Todd that was blowing the whistle, and then Tom was continually praying, and he was praying specifically. He was praying for the Lord to bring them someone that can get out of there quicker than they could. And he just kept continually praying that over and over and over. And about 45 minutes after they left us, they saw a female come out of the bushes, which is very rare. When we go into this trip, we don't see anybody for the 5 days that we're in there. We're so remote. And so the opportunity to see somebody was rare. And so they saw who we now know to be Katie and Dusty, who were boyfriend, girlfriend. They had 2 dogs. And they were actually hiking out as we were hiking in, and their dogs had kind of detoured. So they were hiking out, and probably a mile before we would have just passed each other, the dogs just went down by the lake into the bushes and kind of went on a detour. So Katie and Dusty chased them, and then was perfect timing for when Tom and Todd were coming back out, and they were blowing this whistle. Katie had heard the whistle, and she told us, she's like, I heard this whistle. I'm like, who gives their kid a whistle in the wilderness? Just blowing this whistle all over the place. But they ended up meeting up and they described, Tom and Todd described what had happened, and actually to add on to Tom's prayer, he was praying for someone to get out faster than they could, a mountain runner, something along those lines. And that's who Katie is. That's what she does. She's a mountain runner. So it was another one of those just, and I've talked to people that aren't believers, and they're like, yeah, it's coincidence. I'm like, until you live this and experience it, nope, it's not. I mean, you can believe what you, but living this and being a part of it, it really was divine. So Katie and Dusty hiked with Tom and Todd for probably 5 minutes until, and again, Tom and Todd were cramping up. They were moving slow. And Katie said to Tom, you know what, I think I can get out of here faster than you guys. Do you mind if we take off? Which is exactly, like, literally verbatim the words that Tom had been praying. And so they took off. And it's really, that's what saved Brad's life, was those two being able to make it out, to make the call, to get a helicopter when they did. We've agreed that Brad would not have made it through the night. There's no way he would have. And they would not have sent a helicopter in the dark. And Tom and Todd actually ended up taking a wrong turn and getting lost. And they didn't get out soon enough to be able to get a helicopter in time to get Brad out of there. So if it wasn't for Dusty, Brad wouldn't be here. So it's really remarkable that they ran into Katie and Dusty. And
absolutely.
Yeah, pretty phenomenal.
So while all that's happening, the two of you are still having that rock formation behind you. You and Brad are there. So what happened next?
Yeah, so like I said, I would lay with Brad, I'd pray with him, and then I would run up onto the top of that granite, and there was a crevice on the top. And so I built a fire in that crevice. And then I took that white tarp that Todd had brought and laid it out on top and just laid some rocks on it so the wind wouldn't blow it over. And for the fire, I cut some green boughs, which is good for smoke, obviously for signaling. And so I would just run back and forth and kind of set things up, and then come lay back with Brad and give him water. We had those Camelbacks for our backpacks, which is essentially a hose which was perfect for him, because you bite on it and you suck it. You could regulate how much water. So I wasn't trying to pour water down his throat, but he was so dehydrated that he needed those fluids. So the attack happened at 1 p.m. And I did, while I was laying there, kind of calculating, okay, if it's going to take them 3.5 hours to get out, they need to make a call. They need to start a helicopter. So in my mind, I was thinking 5:30 was like the magic time that it had to happen. And again, very far-fetched that was going to happen. But in my mind, I'm like, that's all we got. And so when we neared that time, I remember it being about 5:15. I told Brad, I'm like, hey, I'm going to go up and start the fire and see what happens. And so I started that fire, and then came back and laid down with Brad. And all of a sudden, he heard something first, and I went up and looked. I didn't see anything, and come to find out, there was a surveillance plane that was flying around. We didn't see that, but I did right at 5:30. I'm like, I think I hear a helicopter, and ran up, and sure enough, like straight across the lake was this helicopter was coming over, and it was literally just gave me goosebumps all over. Like, this is remarkable. This is truly remarkable. He's gonna make it, and. Yeah.
So it's a good thing that tarp was white, as opposed to the camouflage kind of blend in with the surroundings one that you all had hoped for initially.
Exactly. And the pilots, they said they saw it right when they came over the lake. They saw the smoke, they saw the white tarp. Although I didn't realize that, because when they came over, they flew right over me, and then came back and flew. They were searching for a place to land, because it was such rugged country.
Uh-huh.
So initially, I didn't know that they had seen me, and so I remember yelling down at Brad. I'm like, I can't believe this. These guys are flying all over the place. They're not even waving at me. But they finally stopped and hovered and let me know they saw me, and they had to land about a mile away. That was the only spot that they could land a helicopter. So again, it was everything was difficult, as far as it took them, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes to make it up to us, and then we had to carry him down the mountain about a mile, which was excruciating, because it was very rugged country. Took us about an hour to get him down there.
Wow.
And then, yeah, and they, like you had mentioned, they had once they got to us, they said, we have good news and bad news. Good news is Brad's going to fit in the helicopter. Bad news is the helicopter that would be perfect for this rescue is being used for another rescue. So we only have room for Brad. So we're going to have to leave you here. Which initially, I gave him a hard time. And, all in all, I was just so grateful that Brad's going to make it. He's really going to make it. And I don't have to watch my friend die. I don't have to go through that. He doesn't have to go through that. His family doesn't have to go through that,
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's another excerpt from what I wrote about you guys in my book that I would like to quote, just to get your thoughts on it as far as the helicopter goes. So it reads, the white tarp ended up being useful as well because it was used with smoke to signal a helicopter. Involved in another rescue effort at the time, the helicopter only had room for Brad. As he was airlifted in its rescue basket, Justin could hear the blades of the helicopter cut through the evening sky. As they did so, his heart was filled with emotion, not because he was being left behind, but because it was filled with gratitude as he knew that Brad was going to live. And that's a very, I'm going to cry. It's a very, very selfless mindset, and it's interesting how one of the things I wrote about is how gratitude can affect people physically, even if it's not on your own behalf, on just behalf of somebody else. And gratitude is different from happiness. Gratitude comes from the gut. I mean, gratitude is a part of your inner core. And so for you to have that mindset, I mean, again, that's just amazing, because you were left behind in bear territory by yourself.
Yeah.
So was this the point at which you were given was it a satellite phone, I think, and a few items from the people who came to save him?
Yes. Yeah. Fortunately, so there was, which we learned later. So there was 3 people total. There was a male pilot, a male flight nurse, and a female flight nurse. And we learned later that it's very rare for the pilot to leave the aircraft. So in most of these emergency situations, the pilot always stays with the aircraft. So this pilot, his name is Kevin, and he actually knows Minneapolis firefighter, which is another small world deal. But Kevin gets off the aircraft, and without Kevin, I don't know if we would have got him down the mountain as we did. But as we got down to the helicopter, again, we'd been carrying Brad for an hour. I was soaking wet in sweat, but we're nearing sunset. And so the female flight nurse said, hey, do you want a sleeping bag or a jacket? Or I'm like, I'm good. I was wet, and I'm so glad that she had the foresight of giving me. She's like, nope, just take it. If you don't use it, great, but at least you have it. So she gave me a jacket, a sleeping bag. And then they said, we're going to hover for about 15 minutes because we need to burn some fuel to get light enough to be able to get out of here. And while we're doing that, we're going to contact Cody Search and Rescue and make sure that we have a rescue team coming in to hike you out later tonight. And they did that. They landed. She came over and she gave me a satellite phone. So in case anything happened, at least I had a way to contact someone. And she said, we did get a hold of Cody Search and Rescue. They're coming in. They should be in 3 hours. So this was, they took off at about 7 p.m., which is right when the sun started to go down. And once the sun went down, it got cold. It was like a switch got flipped, and all of a sudden there was dew immediately on the grass, and it felt like it was 20 to 30 degrees cooler. It was just freezing cold. And I remember I'm like, I'm good. Let's go. But I remember having to go get firewood in the woods. I didn't like that. And then
didn't you use the light of your cell phone to gather firewood?
Yeah.
I mean, way to totally MacGyver it. Like you were just like, I'll just use what I have and make the best of it.
And the first fire, I gathered a lot of wood and I set up in the middle of the field, and I got that sleeping bag all, I was warm and cozy. And I remember looking up at the stars, and it was miraculous. I've never seen stars like that, just from horizon to horizon, very deep. And I remember laying there, just feeling this just sense of, like you mentioned, gratitude and peace of like, this is amazing. I mean, it was a lot going on. There was a huge adrenaline dump, obviously, because that was a pretty big event. But I remember just being very grateful and very thankful that a helicopter was able to get him into the hospital. And so I laid there. So the worst was I would actually doze off. So I would doze off and then wake up, stoke the fire. And the worst is when I was out of wood and I had to run back into the woods and grab more firewood and come back out And it was about, like they said, about 3 hours later, I heard my name and looked up, and there was 5 headlamps coming through the woods. And like, you and I have talked about this, Jennifer, where I'm usually on the other side of that, where I'm usually the helper, and I have not honestly felt that type of emotion to where they risked their lives for me. And I remember being very just over the top thankful. I remember looking them all, individually in the eyes, shaking their hands, and just telling them, thank you. This is ridiculous. You just hiked 6 miles. You had to do a river crossing
in the dark,
in the middle of the night in grizzly country. And they're like, and afterwards, as we were hiking out, we were having conversations, and there's a lot of, head height thickets that they're like, yeah, we heard stuff rustling around, and we just made noise and kept walking. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So yeah,
wasn't one of those people a volunteer? Like it was like a federal person and some park rangers, and then a volunteer, I think, that came to save you.
So Chris was the game warden, and then there was a federal agent guy, and then I believe there were 3 search and rescue volunteers. Yeah, and they were phenomenal. Like one guy, young guy, he was a roofer, so he had roofed all day, and he was supposed to roof the next day. And we're talking, we didn't get out of there till 2:30 in the morning, and he was supposed to go to work the next day. And I'm like, you guys are amazing. So it's just remarkable. Everyone that we ran into regarding this incident gave me so much hope in humanity, because they were just remarkable. Yeah.
Well, they came to save a stranger, you. And to your point, as a fire captain, you're used to saving people, not being the one who is saved or helped, or and so to be on the other side of the table is just an amazing thing. And when you talk about the physicality of just the emotion that comes with gratitude, gratitude, literally, there's neuroscience behind it. It can actually lower stress hormones and give people kind of a sense of peace, or a sense of hope, for that matter, and also increase the feel-good chemicals of the brain, like dopamine, for example, things like that.
Yes.
So just that rush of emotion.
Yeah.
Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. Super cool.
So you then had to hike with them to get out of the woods. So at what point, like, was the sun coming up by the time you finally got into the city, or what happened there?
So we made it out about 2:30 in the morning, and Chris, the game warden, asked if I would stay with him that night and then ride back in with him and another game warden on horses in the morning to gather all our stuff and then talk through exactly where the bears were, so they could try to piece together, was this a malicious attack? Were they feeding? Trying to figure out what needs to be done with these bears. Yeah. So, and I had not been able to obviously contact with my family or my wife at all. And there was one point on the journey back from the trailhead to where we stayed at a cabin, Chris's cabin, that there was cell phone signal. So I was able to talk to my wife, Mindy, for maybe 5 minutes and just kind of give her, she kind of knew what was going on, but she knew I was still in there and didn't know I was out yet. So I was able to kind of give her a heads up on what was going on. And that was really a non-emotional conversation at that point. I think she was emotional. I was still kind of in the mode of, it's all good. We're good. This is what's happening. And then, so I remember getting to the cabin, and he said, it's going to be early. I'm going to wake you up at, I don't remember if it was 6:30. And I remember him waking me up, and I woke up and looked out the window, and it was the most beautiful country I've ever seen in my life. It was like the river runs through it movie, where there's a river in the background, mountains shooting straight up. And so we got horses loaded up and rode out to the attack site. And as we neared the attack site, the bears were there. Chris was in the lead, and he once we got close, he pulled his gun, but he didn't have to fire. They took off when we approached. We were able to gather all our stuff up and tried to find any kind of clues. We were looking for fur that they could run forensics on and figure out, are these males, females, age, all that kind of stuff. And we weren't able to find anything other than a bunch of blood and all our stuff strewn, over a 1/4-mile area. And then we rode back out, and it was probably halfway down when I got down to the mountain where there was cell phone coverage, when I was able to call Mindy, and that's when the emotional floodgates kind of opened up, where reality hit of what just happened. And I remember just releasing all of that and looking at how big this was. I mean, I almost lost a guy, and the journey was pretty lengthy, but very grateful that everybody's okay.
Oh, absolutely. So when did you finally see the other three guys? It was at the hospital, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, so that was that night that the attack happened on a Sunday, and it was Monday night that I was when I drove down the mountain, and those guys were at the hotel. So I saw Tom and Todd, and then it was that next day, Tuesday, that we went in, and I was able to see Brad.
Do you recall just like what it felt like to see him at the hospital, to have both of you just look at each other and go, like, what just happened?
Yeah, I do vividly. Yeah, he's very much a man of few words, and like a lot of men, doesn't show emotion very freely. And he was obviously doped up on all kinds of drugs because he had multiple surgeries the night before. But I do remember walking in, and his family was in the room, and he didn't take his eyes off me from the minute I walked into the room to over to his bedside, and then when I got there, he just, he looked me in the eyes, and he said, "I appreciate you," which coming from him is
That's huge.
Big deal. Yeah, even if he was doped up, but it was a pretty special moment, really special moment, and we know that we understand what we went through, and we know what we have, and it's one of those things that nobody can ever take it away, and we're just thankful.
Absolutely.
But he's okay,
So the way that I end the chapter that I wrote about the four of you in my book is they went on the trip as friends, but came home as brothers.
Mm-hmm.
One life saved and four changed for life.
Mm-hmm.
Forever bound by a story of loyalty, faith, gratitude, and grit. Great reminders that the best things in life are free.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for being willing to share your story so that others can learn from it, and learn that I would imagine that now when you experience other things in life that you're probably like, you know what, before I might have thought this was a big deal, but now it gives you perspective, and you're like, not that big of a deal.
Right.
you know? But now is Brad practicing medicine again then?
He is. Yeah. He there's some surgeries that he can't do because he's got some limited mobility, but for the most part he can perform what he needs to perform to be able to make a living. So he was back to work 6 months after it happened, which is remarkable. Yeah, he's doing great, and we've been back every year since. We hiked that same trail every year since. Everybody calls him crazy, but he explains, he's like, until you have an experience like that, to him it's a very spiritual place. It's kind of a rebirth to where he would say that he really realized what's important in life. Perspective.
Oh yeah.
Clear, right? So he's a very hard driver. He's a very successful man, and when you have something like that happen, you realize what truly is important: family, friends.
Absolutely.
Like, the things that are free. Money is not important when you're about ready to die on a mountaintop.
Right.
So we've been back every year, and we have more and more guys that are coming with us, which is special.
So now on these trips, just out of the sake of tradition, does Todd insist on bringing that bulky camera case and the white tarp just for tradition?
No, he hasn't. That was the one time. Yeah, one time only.
Right. So is there anything that you want to call out from the story, or perhaps anything that I missed or didn't ask about that you want to share with our listeners?
No, I think you did a great job. Yeah, this is phenomenal. And I have to say, I'm just super proud of you, because I'm watching you kind of flourish and travel all over the world and write books and start podcasts. So good job, Jennifer. Keep doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you. I feel like whether it's my scare with a brain tumor or the story of you guys and about being mauled by two bears and how you all had to jump in and risk your lives and things like that. I feel that by collecting these stories, whether it's for the book or for my public speaking or for the podcast, it's a way to show people that positive things can come out of negative situations, and
Yes.
that a good chunk of life is about perspective, and how when we can't not experience something, we can learn how to figure out the how. And it
Mhm.
might be a new normal to some extent, but it is possible to persevere. And I feel as though by sharing these inspiring stories, that people can learn from them and grow and have a sense
Yep.
of hope.
Yes.
So that being said, thank you for your time and for sharing your story today. And to those of you who are listening, again, please feel free to like and subscribe on YouTube for these videos. And I'll look forward to the next episode. Thanks, Justin.
Jennifer, you're welcome.